Shocking images reveal a death of mangroves across northern Australia. Now, mangroves is a pretty hardy species. They are located in brackish water where fresh water is meeting the salt water. So these mangrove forests are just dying out in northern Australia. Now, I've been looking at some maps and where ocean currents flow through, and I'll give you a possible theory. I don't have any testing in the area, obviously, of what's there, but just by looking at the ocean currents and what I talked about in a video about 8-9 months ago called Last Stand for the Ocean versus the Blob. And basically in that video, I was talking about how Australia is going to be like the gateway to where it's the last stand for the ocean. Because there's a main current that goes right through northern Australia and New Guinea. And I'm thinking that's where a lot of that Fukushima radiation got picked up, and it's been 5.5 years already. Fukushima radiation went into the ocean. So it's about the right time where we're going to start seeing fallouts in the southern hemisphere. 5 years to get from this part of Japan. We know it was in the water transporting tunas in 3 months. So about 5.5 years, we're going to have these huge die-offs in Chile with the whales, the suicidal squids. You see how it goes back up into that warmer equatorial water. And that water on the equator moves fast. If you get a close-up of northern Australia, this is where the deaths are happening. It's along the southern part of this bay here. And it's about 350 miles of dead zones of mangroves. And you see how it has like this circular effect inside this bay. It's a large area. So I'm thinking is that this ocean current of North New Guinea, some of the currents, they're going to go down and they're going to go up through here. And I think some of these currents are just kind of getting backed up like a toilet. And some of this bad part of, who knows, pollution or, what I think could be Fukushima is depositing in these mangrove forests. A mangrove expert says it's the most extreme dieback he's ever seen. The mangrove death occurred across a 700-kilometer stretch, and experts believe is linked to climate change. We've heard that one before. International mangroves expert Dr. Norm Duke said he had no doubt the dieback was related to climate change. No doubt. It's the world's first in terms of a scale of mangroves that have died, he told the ABC. Dr. Duke flew 200 kilometers between the mouths of the Roper and MacArthur rivers in the Northern Territory. What happens is you have these rivers in the southern hemisphere. They tend to run towards the equator, so I think some of these major rivers like the MacArthur, they do dump into this bay here, the Gulf of the Carpentaria. This right here is the MacArthur River. And you have the Robinson River and the Wyvern River. And then you have these little inlets where I think some of this saltwater intrusion intrudes into here. So it's a combination of the mixing of the water here in the Gulf of the Carpentaria. I think it's a combination of factors. We have a mining factor that could be happening here. There's been a long fought battle with this Swiss mining company. It's been affecting the Aborigines. And there was a court decision that was overturned, and they've been, one of the largest mines in the world, not too far from there. And then we have the Fukushima factor. And then on top of that, you have these weather modification, changes in our weather patterns. So I think it's a combination of all three, really. Really, if you want to get to the bottom of it, we should be seeing testing, all type of testing being done on these mangroves. Hard data. And we're just hearing climate change. I'd like to hear more hard data. So he went to survey the extent of the dieback. He described the scene as the most dramatic, pronounced, extreme level of dieback that he's ever observed. Dr. Duke is a world expert in mangrove classification and ecosystems. The images were compelling. They were really dramatic, showing severe dieback of mangrove shoreline fringing, areas just extending off into infinity. Certainly nothing in my experience has prepared me to see images like this. Dr. Duke said he wanted to discover if the dieback in the two states was related. We're talking about 700 kilometers of distance between incidences. The area where the Northern Territory photos were taken is so remote that the only way to confirm the extent and timing of the mangrove dieback was the specialist satellite imagery. With careful analysis, the imagery confirmed the mangrove dieback in both states had happened in the space of a month late from last year. Coincidentally with the coral bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef, we're talking about 10,000 hectares of mangroves were lost across the whole 700-kilometer span, Dr. Duke said. It's not only unprecedented, it's extensive, it's severe, and it's noticeable. I have not seen such imagery anywhere before from all over the world. I work in many places around the world, and I look at damaged mangroves as part of my work all the time. These are the most shocking images of diebacks I've ever seen. Dr. Duke flew to the Northern Territory in June to judge the physical extent of the mangrove's damage. 700 kilometers, about 350 miles right here. Dr. Duke said the cause of such extensive damage was not immediately evident, like a large oil spill, like a cyclone or severe storm. None of those things had occurred in the region in recent times, he said. But in that mix of things that were going on at the time, we're starting to hear about coral bleaching and hot water on the East Coast. He's referring to the hot water on the East Coast of Australia, which would be coming from the currents that are passing through that we were talking about earlier. Now we're talking about what's going on with the reefs. The reefs are starting to collapse. We're getting coral bleaching on these reefs, Great Barrier Reefs of Australia. So we have the coincidental timing of the coral bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef and the dieback of mangroves in the north, that they can always get away from it and say the reason is from far away, it didn't happen over here. Don't look at our, mining operations, had nothing to do with that. It's nothing pollution, they always want to, that's the convenient thing about them always saying it's climate change. He said the lack of fresh water and increased water and atmospheric temperatures stress the plants beyond their tolerance. Satellite imagery pinpoints the damage to a period of around 4 weeks in September. Dr. Duke said many people see mangroves as ugly. They don't look as pretty as coral reefs, so they don't get that attention, he said. But the health of mangroves has a significant impact on the commercial amateur fishing industry in Australia. Mangroves are essential breeding grounds for fish stocks including prawns, crabs, and in North Australia, fine fin fish such as the barramundi. Dr. Duke said he had heard anecdotal reports of lower than usual fish catches in the area of the Northern Territory he surveyed in June. We have fish dying off, barrier reef dying off, and now we have resilient mangrove forests die off.
Welcome to Meeting the Needs of Male Victims of Domestic and Family Violence. My name is Josh Sweeney and I'm from the Australian Institute of Criminology. The presenters today are Dr. Elizabeth Chelly, and we have on the panel Tony McLean, Greg Anderson and Greg Milan. Now, Dr. Elizabeth Chelly is a psychologist in private practice specialising in men's mental health. And since releasing her first book in 2008, Regular Joe versus Mr. Invincible, The Battle for the True Man, has grown in her own awareness of the silent phenomena of male victims of domestic abuse. Astounded at the oppressive personal impact on men and the social blind spot on this sector of our community, she now actively advocates for this much needed area of men's mental health. And as you can imagine, Elizabeth has never been short of stimulating discussions and debates on this issue and broader issues affecting men's identity. And with regular appearances on TV, several radio interviews, and keynotes in Parliament for men's mental health summits, Elizabeth sheds light on misperceptions surrounding men's psychology. She's looking forward to facilitating, along with the present panel today, some healthy and robust discussion on developing awareness, understanding, and services assisting male victims and female perpetrators of intimate partner abuse and violence.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Josh. Welcome everybody, and good on you for lasting the distance. It's the second day of a 2-day and after lunch, so thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for this extended panel discussion. We do hope to get into some discussion a little later on with you. I'll briefly introduce an overview of this particular area, but first up, I'd also like to thank the Australian Institute of Criminology and the sponsors for us being able to share this information and discussion with you today. So as Josh mentioned, I work as a psychologist in Melbourne and specialising in men's mental health general issues, and in particular since releasing my first book, this phenomena that even I was very ignorant and unaware of up to 5 years ago of male victims of domestic abuse. I now do a lot more on the social and media education level, and I'm very happy to be sharing this with you today. So in a few minutes, I'll just be giving you the social psychology side of this that often many of us have confronted in doing some of our own work and education in this area, so that we can set some of it up, of the scene up for you. Just so that some of you are aware, we do have a camera recording on the panel itself for our own professional debrief and development purposes, but none of you are being recorded, so just so that you're aware of that. So as Josh had mentioned, we've got Tony McLean who will be speaking to you. Each presenter will be giving a different angle on this particular topic, and Tony McLean will be sharing some of the research evidence and the methodological considerations with regard to this area. Greg Andreessen will then talk to you about the personal and the social experiences of male victims of family violence in its variable dimensions and interplay, and some of the barriers to them disclosing, and if they do disclose, some of the difficulties they may face in receiving the kind of care and support that they need. And last but not least, we've got Greg Milan, a men's health consultant of over 20 years, and he'll be informing you of a training program for providers, other service providers, health providers and workers in helping men that have been affected by violence. So we'll ask you to hold any questions for any of us till after all of the speakers have presented their information. We'll have about 30 to 40 minutes after all the presentations, so we can really dig into some discussion with you. So please jot down your questions along the way that arise for you, and we'll be sure to attend to them as we finish the presentations. In my growing awareness of this issue, clinically and in the social advocacy endeavours, myself and other workers in this field have constantly battled with a particular overarching theme that comes up. And please excuse me if this is repeating it for many of you in here, but it's worth repeating just so that we're always aware of a particular perception or a paradigm of male perpetrator, female victim 100% of the time. Now, there's obviously no denying there are male perpetrators and female victims. Of course, there's a lot of important work being done in this area and needs to continue. It's the 100% of the time part that we keep encountering, and it's probably best expressed having been a Rotarian for 5 years and meeting various Rotarians in different areas. We had a district assembly a few weeks ago and met a man I hadn't met before, and he asked, "What do you do?" Well, I'm a psychologist and I specialise in men's mental health and work with male victims of domestic abuse, and straightened up and confused look on his face, and the comment was, "They exist." And that's a common thing that we often get and people aren't educated about. So this is the social perceptions we're also needing to break. So as you're well aware, domestic violence services were initially established, and rightly so, to assist female victims, of course. Over the years, over the decades, psychologically, with constant reinforcement of assisting female victims and male perpetrators, the paradigm of men can only ever be perpetrators and women can only ever be victims has unfortunately become ingrained. And whilst we know the research shows otherwise, it's an innocent blind spot that has been developed over the years that makes it difficult for male victims to get service, attention and help. And so it's this perceptual bias and the blind spot that we're looking to address that's been inadvertently developed in this particular field. So putting this in a broader social context for you, where female victims were over 4 decades ago in terms of the silence of their plight and experience and distress, male victims are at that place now. It is a silent phenomena of domestic abuse or violence toward men that's occurring, as my Rotarian friend highlighted, and many others in conversations I've had. And so we're very much focused on community and service provider awareness and education that's required to really ensure appropriate services are available for men. And as Greg Andreessen will mention, some of the blocks that men may face through their service provision to just get some support. So a key perception or factor on the other side of the coin that I'd just like to pose to you as we go through our presentations is, where are we at currently in our views and approach toward female perpetrators of abuse and violence? So we can have male victims and speak about them, but we also need to assist female perpetrators so that everyone in this intricate dynamic gets the assistance that they need. Please let me make some things clear for you, given our collective experience with this topic, that in speaking about male victims, we're in no way diminishing the existence of female victims, their needs and the work that's being done in this area. It's in no way diminishing the resources or about diminishing resources toward assisting female victims and male perpetrators. It's very important work, and that obviously needs to continue. And each speaker may reiterate this along the way, but if they don't mention it, it hasn't been forgotten. So we do most certainly espouse to that very strongly. Having said that, and in this vein, the reality of female victims can neither be a reason that we disregard male victims or their needs and a lot of work that needs to be done for them, or disregarding female perpetrators also being accountable to their behaviour and being able to learn some skills. So in a human level, abuse is abuse, and it is unacceptable. I'll finalise on this slide before I hand over to Tony, but just take a moment to review these myths and perceptions that are out there, some of which again you may already be aware of, but very much worth reiterating as we hear a lot of the detail that the presenters will now be giving to you. And I'll just read them out because they pretty much speak for themselves. That men are always aggressors or initiators in domestic violence disputes, which is clearly false. How could she possibly hurt him? It just doesn't happen. Men are big and strong, therefore he can take it. Definitely false. Men aren't afraid of women's violence or psychological abuse. In our experience, definitely false. He must have done something to deserve it, which is quite a difficult one for men to deal with when they've experiencing the battering of abuse and violence. Definitely false. And most important, men don't feel it or are unaffected by it. They obviously show their symptoms or their experiences and distress differently, but just because they show it differently doesn't mean they're not affected by it. So definitely false. So please just keep those in mind as you hear the presenters.